Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind in Seattle, psychology in Seattle. Let's do it.
The more we worry, the more we just keep going down different rabbit holes of what the possibilities could be, right? The more calm we are, the more calm he'll be.
I love me a good Kwame lecture.
Okay, that's interesting. I don't know what that means. Is she being a jerk face? Because there's a criticism in there, I think. It sounds critical, does it not? And is that justified? Is it not? Given this snippet, I think it is. I wouldn't have worded it that way if I were her, if I were at my best. This is not a good sign. Given their history, I thought they would handle stuff like this better. So I think what would be more healthy for Chelsea is if she were to say, okay, so you're proposing that we try to be as calm as possible. Yeah, we could consider that, but I don't know if that's healthy for me to just suppress my feelings. I'm worried. I also want to reassure you. I think she could do a little bit more along those lines of reassuring him, like, yeah, if my dad's against you, I'm still with you. She kind of said that earlier, so I think that would really cut to the core of his anxiety in this moment. She's like, look, to be clear, if he is against you, then he is prejudiced or he doesn't know you. If that is a concern for Chelsea, then I could imagine Chelsea not wanting to talk about that to get her family canceled by the internet, because I would hope by now that the cast members understand there's a lot at stake in terms of bullying from the internet, which is completely unfortunate. I've seen people bully Chelsea online for ridiculous reasons. I just don't understand. People thinking that she's only attracted to him because she's like objectifying him as a black man, which could be, but there's no indication of that. And why would you go there? I know why people go there, because there's a history of that, and it currently happens today, but to just assume that that's the case, it'd be one thing to throw it out there as a question. It's another thing to throw it out there knowing you feel like you know that answer and then proceed to attack her online because of that. It's just, now maybe y'all have watched ahead and there's been some indication of that. It's hard to imagine that happening, but anyway. Yeah, so I think she could have said something like, so I'm detecting that you're worried about my dad's approval. Totally fine. I'm glad that you're worried. I don't think there's anything tremendous to worry about. And also, if he is a jerk face, I'll deal with it and I'll bring him around. And I want to protect you from any kind of attack that he might have. I don't think he will, but who knows? I'm protective of you. I will protect you. You don't have to fight back with him. I will go after him. I don't know. I'm reading into it a lot in terms of what they're worried about. But instead she says, I like myself a good Kwame lecture. So that also points to the possibility that she's been through this before with Kwame, where he will, instead of expressing his fears, which I think is justified here, and saying, I'm afraid your dad's going to disapprove of me, and I'm afraid you're going to leave me because of that. I think that's totally normal, but he gets quiet, then he denies it, and then when there's an opportunity to talk about it, he tries to control her feelings, not in an abusive way, but suggesting the suppression of feelings as if, and then, his initial statement was, your anxiety is making me anxious, which is unusual to, especially given the conversation prior to this. She wasn't just like completely flipping out. She was just like, yeah, there's a concern there. And I think he's regressing a little bit, but anyway, it's understandable that he's afraid. There's a lot at stake and there's potential bigotry and attacking from the outside to this relationship. That's normal. But then I want you to not be scared, and now I'm going to tell you what you should do with, and then she says what she said. Let's rewind that.
You just tell your truth. The more we worry, the more we just keep going down different rabbit holes of what the possibilities could be, right? The more calm we are, the more calm he'll be.
I love me a good Kwame lecture.
You give me more lectures than I give you.
I don't think so.
Yeah, so it's hurtful, and this is great. It gives it, and it's not great, it's happening, but it's a great example of it. Every couple does this. So it all starts with this. He's worried about approval from the dad and worried that with disapproval, he will lose Chelsea. Terrifying prospect. He has no idea what's going to happen, and he doesn't even have a lot of trust in Chelsea because why would he? They just met like a couple weeks ago or a few weeks ago. So there's a lot of justifiable fear. And for whatever reason, he doesn't feel safe to talk about that, or he doesn't have enough self-awareness to identify that, or he is buying into toxic masculine ideas of I can't be afraid because that's what wussies do, and I can't express my fear. I have to be in control. Women want that. That's another toxic masculine. And some women want toxic masculine men, which is a factor. It's not the main factor, of course. Toxic masculinity drives itself, but there is some encouragement from the outside in society and heterosexual partners, women. Anyway, not always, of course. We don't blame the women for toxic masculinity, but point is that for whatever reason, I don't know why, he is avoiding it. He wants to communicate it through that silent treatment or that quietness. It wasn't silent treatment, but it was like shutting down, giving that body language, non-eye contact, pacing around. She asks, and he says, nothing's wrong. And then he feels like, well, I got to say something. So he says, well, you're making me, he's noticing he's feeling anxious. And then he says, this is all your fault, essentially. Not horribly so, but basically that's the gist of what he's saying. Then they sit down to talk about it, and she's, I think, dealing with it pretty well, for the most part, if I remember right, this conversation. And then he shifts his mode to what I thought to be a more open language, and it is, but it's also one of criticalness, criticizing her. Not terribly so. This isn't in a zone of abuse at all. This is totally mundane couple stuff. Me and my wife probably did this earlier today, some version of this. I mean, this isn't typical to us, but it's common. So he says, not only I want you to not be anxious, but gives her, one way to put it, a lecture on the truth, telling her that he knows the right way and she doesn't. That's the message, right? We need to be calm because then everything will work out. It's a declarative statement. It's not like, well, this is what I'm thinking. I don't know. What do you think? Or this is what I would really like. I don't know if it would work out. That's a different approach. Instead, he just tells her, this is how it is. And the message is, again, this is harsh language. It doesn't go in this. But again, commonly, this is what's happening. You could imagine Chelsea receiving it as, I know what to do and you don't. Let me explain it to you. Emotions are bad. You need to shut down your emotions. The fact that I'm going through something right now is your fault. He's not saying that explicitly. I don't even know if he's implying that, but it would be hard to imagine Chelsea receiving it that way. Then Chelsea, with that saying, and because she's off kilter a little bit, or because it's her nature or something, she doesn't respond in a healthy way to that. I mean, it's hard to in those situations. When I talk with individual clients about these kinds of situations, I will sometimes try to help them just from their side of things be more healthy in the communication when they're at home. And, it's a two-way street, but if you change your behavior, you can alter things quite a bit. So you don't have to be in couple therapy to go to therapy and change your relationship. So she doesn't do that. She, doesn't go on a major offensive, but kind of an offensive tactic of saying, not only you're lecturing me, but I'm going to kind of smirk and mock you kind of in a sense. And also I'm telling you do this all the time, and I'm doing it in front of the cameras. It's kind of another thing. And then let's rewind and see what he said.
The more we worry, the more we just keep going down different rabbit holes of what the possibilities could be, right? The more calm we are, the more calm he'll be.
I love me a good Kwame lecture.
You give me more lectures than I give you.
Right, so then that hurts him and discounts him, and then he gets hurt. And now he has more reasons to feel concerned, right? He was already worried, and now his feelings are hurt. People in his position will often feel like their feelings are being discounted because their feelings aren't being acknowledged, or what they feel isn't being validated. But of course, he's not communicating how he feels. He's just criticizing her and trying to tell her to downplay emotions. And he's saying his emotions are her fault, that kind of thing. And so he now has another reason to be upset because he feels like she's not listening to him. He's trying to corral this emotion, and he's trying to involve her. And maybe that's his pattern, is to shut down. And that's what he was doing in that moment. He was having, I imagine if you hooked him up to markers of distress, he might have been an 8 out of 10 when he was pacing around. I mean, it kind of looked that way to me. But he shuts down, and then he doesn't know how to express that or something. That's normal. Anyway, so then she says lecture, and he's hurt by that, hurts his feelings, and then he gets defensive, just in a classic way. Well, you get defensive, or you lecture too sometimes. And then we're kind of off to the races. So unless one of them either derails the fight and just changes the subject or ends it and says, well, let's just talk about it later, or one of them rises above it and resets and says like, okay, I think we've got off track. Let's start over. And this is what I try to get to eventually. It's like, okay, because if you just address everything that just happened, it'll be a downward spiral. For her, if the tendency is, well, he just said that, so I have to address it. I have to refute it. Like, well, you lecture more than me do. I mean, everyone, more than I do. Everyone understands that. Or you're getting defensive or whatever. If you're just addressing the last thing that he said, because the last thing he said is meant as an argumentative tactic, right? So if you just focus on the last thing, if everyone just focused on the last thing, it just keeps going up and up and up because things hurt more than the person probably intended it to be. So the solution is to zoom out and start over and go, okay, how did we get here? Let's start from the beginning. And let's return to what we were talking about. I was talking about how I was worried about my dad's approval of you. What's going on with you with that? So that'd be one way. Or for Kwame to reset and be like, okay, wait, okay. So it all started when you're talking about dad, and I guess I'm just worried about your dad's approval, and I'm worried that he will, if he disapproves of me, that you'll dump me, because that's happened to me in my past or something like that. That would certainly get this out of this downward spiral. So let's see what happens.
Calm we are, the more calm he'll be.
I love me a good Kwame lecture.
You give me more lectures than I give you.
I don't think so.
Oh, whoa there, buddy. You give me a good lecturing pretty often.
I think you give me more.
No.
And, when I am working with couples like this, I will, if it's the beginning of treatment, I might just strong arm the relationship a little bit. If this is 2 years into treatment, I'll maybe, depending, let this play out a little bit and hope that they rein it in. But in the beginning, that's asking too much. And so I would just say, okay, well, I think we're going down a road, and I want to observe that the two of you are basically attacking each other, trying to establish the other person is worse than the other. And that's not a constructive conversation. And let's just say that lecturing happens between the two of you. And any amount of lecturing is probably, I'm guessing it sounds like it's not very helpful to the person getting the lecture, and the other person doesn't receive it. Let's not worry about who does it more or who does it less. Maybe we can talk about that later, but let's just all agree that whatever amount of lecturing is happening is not okay. So that puts people in the position of like, well, we don't have to fight about who does it more. Let me just acknowledge, and then hopefully they can acknowledge that to each other. That's another tip as well, is if you're in a situation like that where you're fighting about that or even thinking about it, about like that tit for tat, that ledger of like, well, he said that about me, but he does that more to me. When you're in that situation, and especially when you're trying to fight with the other person to win the conversation, to win the fight, it is a road of destruction typically. There's almost nothing good that comes from these kind of conversations. Once in a while, okay, but you do this enough times, it really erodes the love and the goodwill, causes a buildup of hurt, a buildup of anger, and you're shorter with the other person. You're more prone to attacking the other person, more prone to lecturing the other person. So I don't know, this isn't very promising.
Than I give you.
I don't think so.
Oh, whoa there, buddy. You give me
a great thing Chelsea could have said in that moment is, you're right, I do lecture you, you're right. And I kind of feel like you were just lecturing me. Another tactic, again, would just be to derail it and just be like, okay, you're right, I lecture you sometimes. I kind of felt like you were lecturing me earlier. That's not really the point. The point is we were talking about my dad. Let's get back to that.
good lecturing pretty often.
I think you give me more.
No. I think we're both on edge here a bit. But I'm the one who has to do the impressing.
And you rinse and repeat this enough times and people get divorced. And when you ask them why they got divorced, they'll just be like, I don't know, we fought all the time. And you ask them, well, what'd you fight about? And they'll just be like, I don't know, everything. There's this myth out there that the reason why people break up is because they fight about like particular topics. In fact, there's research that suggests that people fight about certain things like sex and money and that kind of thing. But in my experience, yeah, if you ask people, that's what they'll say. But when you actually watch them, it's not these topics. It's the way they talked to each other when they were talking about those topics.
I think
Not
that,
necessarily. This is us having to do the impressing.
but like I'm coming into your family, right? And he's,
For sure. There's that dynamic.
So,
but we
like-
also are going to be a partnership.
for sure.
So it's
I understand
He's
that.
going to be looking at our dynamic, like both of us.
Okay.
It's just kind of like a wild card. You just don't know how they're going to react.
Okay, so maybe that's what he's reacting against. She basically implied, you better perform well as a partner to me because that's what they're going to be evaluating us on. So, and I guess that's rational to point that out, but is she trying to say you better act good? You better put your ego on the back burner? Or I don't know. It's hard to know what she meant by that, but maybe that's what was tweaking him.
A little bit, but like he's never disliked really, like at least openly to me and one of my exes. But I don't think he's ever really like liked one for me, from like my husband, you know?
That makes sense. Have you ever liked anyone for your life partner?
So that's interesting that he's saying that. I think it's either that he's saying, well, let's not worry so much about what your dad wants for you. Let's think about what you want for you, okay? The other interpretation is that is the primary worry that he's having. Like, what if your parents influence you and you leave me? Do you want to be with me? And he indirectly asks that by asking that question. I don't know. What do you think?
Have you ever liked anyone for your life partner?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
Great. Do you like me as your life partner?
Yes.
All right, then. I think we're doing okay. That's a great start.
Yeah, I don't know, but that's evidence that I was at least in the ballpark of the conceptualization that from the beginning, that's been his primary worry. That's often our primary worry. It's weird how much we worry about that. You could be not weird in the sense that it's actually weird. It's just counter to the way that we think of secure relationships or even just healthy, confident relationships. That 25 years into a beautiful, wonderful marriage, you can wake up one day or just have a moment where you legitimately have a concern that your partner doesn't love you and doesn't want to be with you, even though there's really no indication of that. Or maybe it's a slight indication of that. And suddenly this part of you becomes terrified, particularly if you have history of abandonment and betrayal along those lines, and you have schemas along those lines. But even if you don't, it's normal. So that was my suspicion, is that from the beginning of this whole conversation, the primary foundation that he's looking for is, do you want to be with me? Am I secure in this relationship with you? And it's very healthy that he, earlier I was saying it'd be great if he could reset, and him asking that question is, I think, along those lines of just like, I think what I'm looking for is some reassurance along those lines. So I'll just ask her, and then she reassures him, and then he's like, great.
It means that I'm a little bit ahead of most of the guys you've dated, right?
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Oh, wait. I guess I missed that. The parents are coming over now? This is just before they show up? Yeah, I could see how their anxiety would be particularly heightened right now, or the highest that it would be right now.
Hey, do you trust me that I'll do all right?
Actually, that could be another concern of his, which would be rational, that he feels her anxiety is evidence that she doesn't trust him, that she thinks he's not stable or healthy or impressive or interesting or something. And he feels like that's a judgment. Like, why are you so worried about your parents' approval of me? Is there something I should know about how you see me? I don't know, but if so, it's good that he just asks that question outright.
Yes.
Then trust me.
Okay, I think it's the end of the episode. So he's saying, hey, trust me, I got it. I'm good with people. Like, I don't want you to worry. The other thing I should mention is that with undifferentiation, with fusion, when other people are having an emotion that is difficult to deal with, and you have no ability to separate yourself from that person emotionally, not that you reject them or run away from them, but you just say, okay, well, they're having a feeling and I'm not having that feeling, and I'll do what I can to help them with that feeling. But if they have that feeling, then they have that feeling, and I can't control other people's feelings. I don't want them to have that feeling. It kind of threatens me. And also I just feel bad for her that she's having this feeling, but I can't control everything, and she's just going to have her feelings, and we'll just see how this works out. That's differentiation, the ability to enmesh with someone when it's safe to do so, and when you're in love and you want to be together. And then when someone is starting to descend into some emotion, you have the ability to separate from them emotionally. You're still with them and you're listening to, but you don't get dragged down with them and thus have an uncontrollable drowning in someone else's emotions. So on the scale of things, I think he's pretty differentiated, but I think he demonstrated a bit of fusion in this moment. Hard to know. And it's normal. So with the model of differentiation, listen to my deep dives on the topic with Bowenian therapy, psychotherapy, is that the model states that we baseline have a typical differentiation level. And depending on stress, we'll either descend into more undifferentiation, or if things are going particularly well, we'll operate at a higher level of differentiation, a higher level of health, a higher level of non-reactivity to things that aren't very helpful to us, and vice versa. So it's dependent on the situation. And also, if we can raise our baseline differentiation level, then we react better to stress. But all of us under stress will become less differentiated than we are typically. And this is a very stressful situation. A lot's at stake. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone, please take care of yourself and take care of others, because we all deserve it. We really, really do.